Humiliation tasted like ash and cheap whiskey. Nathaniel Blackwood stood in the back row of Christie's auction house on
This
Fifth
veil
Avenue,
is as
watching a
beautiful as our
stranger in a
future
top
together.
hat bid
With you, every
$3,000
moment
for his
is a
mother's
dream.
sapphire necklace. The same
Moment has
necklace
arrived.
she had worn the day she
Forward.
died
It's
in his arms,
breathtaking.
whispering
Stay
promises
close.
he had
The
failed to
presentation
keep.
awaits.
The autumn rain hammered against the tall windows, turning the gaslight into fractured halos. 200 of New York's wealthiest citizens filled
My fellow
the gilded
citizens,
room,
we gather here
their
today
silk
to
rustling
affirm our
like
shared
hungry
values
locusts
and
as they
chart a
picked through
course
the
for the
bones of the
future.
Blackwood legacy. Paintings his grandfather had commissioned, furniture that had survived 3 generations, books bound in Moroccan leather, their spines cracked from his mother's careful reading. All of it gone. 4,000, a woman called from the front, her voice sharp with greed. Nathaniel's hands curled into fists. The champagne flute in his right hand shattered. Crystal fragments bit into his palm. Blood welled up warm and wet, dripping onto the white marble floor in perfect crimson drops. The auctioneer paused mid-sentence. The crowd turned as one, a many-headed beast scenting fresh meat. "Your Grace," the auctioneer said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Are you quite well?" Nathaniel felt the weight of their stares. These people had attended his father's funeral 3 years ago, whispering behind their gloved hands about the gambling debts, the mortgage properties, the spectacular fall of a once great house. Now they watched the son bleed for jewels he could no longer afford, and their eyes gleamed with satisfaction. He wanted to lunge forward, wanted to grab that necklace from the velvet display and run, wanted to tell them all to go to hell. A hand gripped his elbow, firm, steady. "Don't," Percy Whitmore whispered. "You can't afford the scandal." Percival Whitmore had been Nathaniel's friend since university, back when the Blackwood name still meant something. Now Percy was his lawyer, the only man in New York still willing to shake hands with a duke whose pockets held nothing but iOS and broken promises. "That necklace is worth $8,000, Nathaniel said through clenched teeth. Blood dripped from his fist onto Percy's expensive sleeve. "The bastard's stealing it for 3. 4,000 now," Percy corrected. "And you don't have 400, let alone 4,000. Let it go, Nate." The auctioneer's gavel fell like a gunshot. "Sold to Mrs. Harriet Vanderburg for $4,000. The crowd applauded politely. Nathaniel watched the necklace disappear into a velvet case, watched Mrs. Vanderburg's satisfied smile, and felt something inside him crack wider than the champagne glass. "Come on," Percy said quietly. "Let's get you out of here." They pushed through the crowd toward the exit. Nathaniel kept his bleeding hand pressed against his coat, leaving dark stains on the fabric. He heard the whispers following him like smoke. "Bankrupt, you know. His father gambled away everything. Heard the bank forecloses next month. What a waste of a title." The cold October air hit Nathaniel's face like a slap. He sucked in a breath, tasting rain and coal smoke and his own failure. Percy steered him toward a waiting carriage, black and anonymous in the gathering dusk. Inside, Percy produced a handkerchief and wrapped it around Nathaniel's bleeding palm with practiced efficiency. "You need to stop doing this to yourself," Percy said. "Doing what watching strangers auction off my life. Going to these auctions, torturing yourself." Percy tied off the makeshift bandage with a sharp tug. "It's done, Nate. The estate is gone. The furniture is gone. Your mother's jewels are gone. Standing in the back of Christie's won't change that." Nathaniel leaned his head against the leather seat and closed his eyes. The carriage rolled forward, wheels clattering over cobblestones. Rain drummed on the roof like impatient fingers. "How long?" he asked. 18 days, Percy said quietly. "The bank forecloses on Blackwood Manor in 18 days. After that, you'll be a duke with no land, no home, and no prospects. And the families." Percy was silent for a long moment. That silence told Nathaniel everything he needed to know. "The tenant families," Nathaniel pressed, "the 50 families living on Blackwood land. What happens to them?" "The bank will sell to a developer," Percy said finally. "Probably Cornelius Hartwick. He'll tear down the cottages and build factories. The families will be evicted." Nathaniel opened his eyes. Through the rain-streaked window, he watched the gaslit streets of Manhattan blur past. Pedestrians hurried through the downpour, their umbrellas like black mushrooms bobbing in the gloom. Somewhere out there, 50 families were living in houses his great-grandfather had built, working land his family had protected for generations, and trusting that the Duke of Blackwood would keep his promises. His mother's last words echoed in his memory. "Take care of them, Nathaniel. They're our responsibility. Promise me." He had promised, and like everything else in his life, he was failing. "There's another option," Percy said carefully. Nathaniel turned from the window. His friend's face was half-shadowed in the dim carriage light, unreadable. What option? Percy reached into his leather satchel and withdrew a thick document bound in red ribbon. He held it like a man holding a live snake. A marriage contract, Percy said. From the Earl of Carstairs. Nathaniel stared at the document. Cornelius Carstairs, the railroad magnate. The same. He's offering a substantial dowry for a union between his daughter and yourself. How substantial? $200,000, Percy said, paid immediately upon marriage, plus full restoration funds for Blackwood Manor and the tenant cottages. The number hung in the air between them like a prayer and a curse. $200,000 would pay off every debt, would rebuild the manor, would construct the winter housing he had promised the tenant families 3 years ago, would restore the Blackwood name to something resembling honor. There must be a catch, Nathaniel said. Percy's expression grew even more guarded. The daughter, Genevieve Carstairs. What about her? She's 24 years old, unmarried, and she hasn't been seen in New York society for 6 years. Nathaniel felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. Why not? There are rumors. Percy chose his words carefully. About her appearance. Some say there was a fire in the family home when she was 18. Others claim smallpox left her scarred. There are whispers of deformities, of madness, of... Is she dying? Nathaniel interrupted. No. Is she violent? Not that I've heard. Can she speak? Percy hesitated. I'm told she's educated, well-read. But I must warn you, Nate, Earl Carstairs has been very specific. You are not permitted to see her before the wedding. He claims she's sensitive about her appearance. Nathaniel looked down at his bandaged hand. Blood had already soaked through the white handkerchief, spreading in a dark red bloom. Let me understand this clearly, he said. Carstairs is offering me $200,000 to marry his daughter. A daughter so hideous or damaged that she's been locked away for 6 years and cannot be seen before the ceremony. That's the essence of it, yes. And if I refuse, the bank forecloses. 50 families lose their homes. The Blackwood line ends in disgrace. Percy paused. And you'll have broken your promise to your mother. The words hit harder than any fist. Nathaniel turned back to the window, watching the rain-soaked city slide past. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like cannon fire. He thought of his mother's face in those final days. The way the illness had hollowed her cheeks but couldn't dim the fierce light in her eyes. The way she had gripped his hand with surprising strength and made him swear. The people on our land, Nathaniel, they're not property. They're our charge, our sacred trust. If you let them suffer because of your father's mistakes, you're no son of mine. He had been 29 years old then, drowning in his father's debts and his own failures, and he had promised. Promised to protect them. Promised to build them the winter housing his father had gambled away. Promised to be better than the weak, selfish man his father had become. 3 years later, that promise was all he had left. Does Carstairs know about my situation? Nathaniel asked. He knows you're in debt. He knows the estate is failing. That's precisely why he's making this offer. Percy leaned forward. Think about it, Nate. You need money and legitimacy. He needs a title for his daughter. It's a business arrangement. Marriages like this happen every day in our circles. Marriages to women who can be seen in daylight. Read the contract first, Percy urged, holding out the red ribbon document. At least consider it. Nathaniel took the papers. They were heavy, expensive vellum, covered in dense legal script, the kind of contract that bound men's lives with words and signatures and wax seals. The carriage turned onto Wall Street. Percy's law office loomed ahead, a granite fortress in the rain. Come inside, Percy said as the carriage stopped. We'll go through the terms. You don't have to decide tonight. But Nathaniel knew he was lying. They both knew he had already decided. The moment Percy mentioned $200,000 and 50 families, the decision had been made. He just had to find the courage to sign his name. Percy's office smelled of leather and old paper and the peculiar mustiness of important documents sealed away from light. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting dancing shadows across walls lined floor to ceiling with law books. Nathaniel sat in a leather chair that had probably cost more than most men earned in a year and spread the marriage contract across Percy's mahogany desk. Whiskey, Percy offered, already pouring 2 generous glasses. It's not even noon. It's after 11. Close enough. Percy handed him the crystal tumbler. You'll want it for this. Nathaniel took a drink. The whiskey burned, going down sharp and clean. Outside, rain continued its relentless assault on the windows. He began to read. The contract was 12 pages of dense legal language, but certain phrases leaped out like accusations. The bride, Miss Genevieve Marie Carstairs, being of sound mind and body. A dowry of $200,000 payable immediately upon legal marriage. Restoration funds for Blackwood Manor and associated properties, not to exceed $50,000. The groom, Nathaniel Alexander Blackwood, 9th Duke of Blackwood, agrees to provide said bride with the title of Duchess. Nathaniel paused at clause 14. What's this? He asked, pointing to a dense paragraph on page 7. Percy leaned over to look. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Financial administration clause, he said. Standard protection for the dowry provider. But Nathaniel was an engineer by training. Before his father's death had drowned him in debt, in whiskey, he had designed 12 bridges across 3 states. He knew how to read technical documents, how to spot the details that mattered. He read clause 14 again more carefully. All funds provided by the Earl of Carstairs shall be administered solely by the Duchess of Blackwood until such time as Blackwood Manor and associated properties are deemed financially solvent by independent audit. The Duke of Blackwood agrees to submit all expenditures exceeding $100 for approval by the Duchess or her designated financial representative. Nathaniel looked up slowly. This clause gives her complete control of the money. Until the estate is solvent, Percy said quickly. That's a protection for Carstairs. He wants to ensure his money actually goes toward restoration, not toward settling gambling debts. I don't gamble. Your father did. Carstairs wants guarantees. Nathaniel set down his glass. So I marry this woman sight unseen. She gets a duchess's title. I get $200,000 I can't actually touch. She controls every dollar until some undefined future date when the estate is magically solvent. You could negotiate, Percy said, but his voice lacked conviction. Could I? Nathaniel flipped to the final page. Or does Carstairs take his money and walk away if I change a single word? Percy's silence was answer enough. Nathaniel stood and walked to the window. 5 stories below, Wall Street bustled with commerce despite the rain. Bankers and brokers hurried between buildings, their umbrellas jostling for space on the crowded sidewalks. Men making money, losing money, building empires and watching them crumble. I want to change 3 things, Nathaniel said. Percy joined him at the window. Nate, 3 clauses, non-negotiable. Nathaniel turned to face his friend. First, any child born of this marriage inherits equally regardless of gender. I won't trap a daughter in the same legal hell that's drowning me. Percy nodded slowly. I can argue for that. What else? Second, Miss Carstairs retains full legal control of any property or money she brings to the marriage. It doesn't automatically become mine upon marriage. She owns what's hers. That's unusual, but Carstairs will probably appreciate it. Third, Nathaniel looked down at the contract at clause 14 with his careful language of control and mistrust. The financial administration clause stays, he said quietly. I don't change a word. Percy's eyebrows shot up. You're accepting that she controls all the money, Nate? That's fair, Nathaniel interrupted. She's marrying a stranger, a broke stranger from a family of gamblers and failures. Why should she trust me with her father's fortune? He met Percy's gaze. If I were her, I wouldn't. For a long moment, Percy just stared at him. Then something shifted in his expression. Something that looked almost like respect. When did you grow a conscience? Percy asked. Somewhere between losing my mother and losing everything else. Nathaniel returned to the desk and picked up Percy's fountain pen. Draft those changes and send them to Carstairs. If he accepts, we have a deal. And if he rejects them, Nathaniel thought of his mother's sapphire necklace in Mrs. Vanderberg's grasping hands. Thought of 50 families facing winter in cottages with holes in the roofs. Thought of the Blackwood name becoming a joke told in gentlemen's clubs. Then I sign the original and hope Miss Genevieve Carstairs is a better person than I deserve. He dipped the pen in ink. The nib scratched across the heavy paper, signing his name in bold, decisive strokes. Nathaniel Alexander Blackwood. The ink gleamed wet and black, like blood, in the firelight. There, Nathaniel said, setting down the pen. Tell Earl Carstairs he has his duke. Tell him I expect the first installment of the dowry deposited in the Blackwood account within 24 hours of the wedding ceremony. He grabbed his coat from the chair and headed for the door. Where are you going? Percy called after him. To Blackwood Manor. I need to tell 50 families they won't be homeless this winter. Nate, wait. Percy hurried around the desk. You should know something else. About Miss Carstairs. Nathaniel paused with his hand on the doorknob. What? Percy hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The Earl has made one additional stipulation. The ceremony must take place within 2 weeks. November 1st at St. Patrick's Cathedral. No delays, no postponements. Why the rush? He didn't say, But there are rumors that someone else tried to court Miss Carstairs 6 years ago. A marquis. The engagement ended badly, very badly. Some say that's when she went into seclusion. You think she's heartbroken, pining for a lost love? I think there's more to Genevieve Carstairs than rumors of scars and reclusion, Percy said quietly. I think Earl Carstairs is desperate to marry her off, desperate enough to pay a fortune to a bankrupt duke. Nathaniel pulled open the door. Cold air rushed in from the stairwell, carrying the scent of rain and coal smoke. I'm marrying her to save 50 families from homelessness, he said. I'm not expecting a love story. I'm expecting a transaction. Money for a title. That's all this is. And if she's difficult, if the rumors are true and she's hideous, mad, scarred beyond recognition. Nathaniel shrugged. Then I'll be a gentleman about it. I'll give her the title she wants, take the money her father offers, and we'll live separate lives in different wings of Blackwood Manor. She'll be a duchess. I'll keep my promises. Everyone gets what they need. That's a cold way to enter a marriage. It's an honest way, Nathaniel corrected. Better than pretending this is anything other than what it is. He stepped into the stairwell. Behind him, Percy called out one last warning. Nate, the wedding is in 13 days. If you're going to change your mind, do it before you stand at that altar. But Nathaniel was already descending the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the narrow space. The contract was signed. The decision was made. In 13 days, he would marry Genevieve the Phantom. And God help them both. 400 miles away in a limestone manor perched on a Connecticut hillside, Genevieve Carstairs stood before a full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom. She wore a simple day dress of dark blue wool, high-necked and severe. Her blonde hair was pinned up in a style that would have been fashionable 6 years ago when she had last appeared in society. Her face was pale, her eyes the color of winter ice. She was by any objective measure beautiful. Not pretty, not merely attractive. Beautiful in the way that made men stop and stare, made women whisper behind their fans, made artists reach for their brushes. High cheekbones that could have been carved from marble, skin like fresh cream, lips the color of crushed roses, eyes so blue they seemed to hold their own light. The face of an angel, the face that had destroyed her life. Genevieve practiced her wedding vows in the mirror, watching her lips form the words. I, Genevieve Marie Carstairs, take thee, Nathaniel Alexander Blackwood. Her voice was steady. Good. She had been practicing for weeks, training herself not to shake, not to show weakness. On the dresser beside the mirror lay a leather folder stuffed with papers. Investigation reports purchased from a detective agency in Manhattan. Everything there was to know about the 9th Duke of Blackwood. Nathaniel Alexander Blackwood, age 32, 6 feet 2 inches tall, dark hair, gray eyes, educated at Yale, graduated with honors in civil engineering, designed 12 bridges before his father's death, skilled horseman, expert fencer, once considered one of New York's most eligible bachelors, now considered one of New York's most spectacular failures. Genevieve had read every page of that file a dozen times. She knew about the gambling debts his father had left behind, knew about Blackwood Manor mortgaged to the rafters, knew about the mistress he kept in a townhouse on Chelsea Walk, Scarlett Beaumont, opera singer, red hair, green eyes, 28 years old and beautiful in the obvious, uncomplicated way that men seemed to prefer. Genevieve knew because she had paid a photographer to document their meetings. The images were tucked into the back of the file. Nathaniel and Scarlett entering the Chelsea townhouse at dusk. Nathaniel and Scarlett leaving the opera house at midnight. Nathaniel and Scarlett sitting at a cafe, his hand covering hers on the table. She had studied those photographs until she could have drawn them from memory. Most women would have called off the engagement upon discovering their fiancé kept a mistress. Genevieve had simply adjusted her plans. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called. The door opened to reveal Cornelius Carstairs, 7th Earl of Carstairs. At 63, he was still a handsome man, though illness had begun to hollow his cheeks and dim his once bright eyes. He leaned heavily on a cane, his breathing labored from the climb up the stairs. Father, Genevieve said, turning from the mirror, you shouldn't be climbing stairs. My heart will last long enough to see you married. Cornelius interrupted. He crossed to the window seat and lowered himself carefully onto the cushions. The Duke has signed the contract. Well, Genevieve felt something tighten in her chest, not quite fear, not quite triumph, something in between. Did he accept the terms? He requested 3 changes, all favorable to you, interestingly enough. Cornelius pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. Equal inheritance for any daughters. Your property remains legally yours. And he accepted Clause 14 without modification. Genevieve took the paper and read the amendments. Her father was right. These weren't the changes of a man trying to seize control. These were the changes of a man with a conscience. Dangerous. She had been prepared for a greedy rake who would spend her money on mistresses and horses. She had been prepared for a cold aristocrat who would ignore her existence. She had even been prepared for a cruel man who would use his legal rights as a husband to control her. But a man with a conscience, a man who would protect the rights of daughters he didn't have, a man who would voluntarily give his wife financial control, that was unexpected. He may complicate things, Genevieve said quietly. Cornelius laughed, a dry sound like rustling paper. Most women would be pleased to discover their future husband has scruples. Most women aren't marrying for the reasons I am. Her father's expression sobered. Vivi, you don't have to do this. I can hire better lawyers. We can fight Reginald in court. And lose, Genevieve interrupted. We both know Reginald has enough judges in his pocket to tie up Mother's trust fund in legal battles for years. By the time we win, if we win, you'll be dead and I'll be locked away in whatever asylum he's chosen. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. Genevieve crossed to her father and knelt beside his chair, taking his frail hands in hers. Reginald wants me declared incompetent so he can control Mother's inheritance. The only way to stop him is to marry. Once I'm a duchess, legally protected by a husband, Reginald loses his leverage. You're using Blackwood as a shield. I'm using him as protection, yes, but also, Genevieve stood and walked back to her dresser, running her fingers over the investigation file. For 6 years, I've been the phantom, the hideous recluse, the monster locked in the countryside. Because of what Ashford did. Because I chose to use what Ashford did, Genevieve said. Marquis Ashford spread lies about me when I refused his proposal. Lies about scars, about madness, about deformities. He ruined my reputation because I wounded his pride, and instead of fighting the rumors, I weaponized them. She turned to face her father. I wanted to discover whether anyone possessed genuine kindness, whether anyone would court the phantom with compassion, whether anyone would see past rumors to the person beneath. And Blackwood has already shown his character. Genevieve picked up the investigation file and pulled out a handwritten note from her informant at Percy's office. His exact words, I'm marrying a recluse with a face that frightens children to pay off debts. She gets a title. I get 50 roofs. I don't care if she looks like a gargoyle as long as her check clears. Her father winced. Vivi, he expects a gargoyle, Genevieve said, her voice steady. When I lift that veil, he'll feel relief, then gratitude, perhaps even desire. He'll think fortune has smiled on him. And then he'll discover that beauty doesn't equal compliance, that the gargoyle he married simply wears a different mask. Genevieve returned to the mirror, studying her reflection with clinical detachment. He wanted a transaction. He'll get one, under my terms. Yet Cornelius was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question Genevieve had been dreading. Do you want to be happy, Vivi? Or do you just want to be vindicated? The words hit harder than she expected. She looked away suddenly, unable to meet her father's knowing gaze. I want to be free, she said finally. Free from Reginald's threats. Free from society's whispers. Free from being the phantom, the monster, the woman too damaged to be seen in daylight. And if Blackwood turns out to be better than you expect, then I'll reassess, Genevieve said. But I won't be naive. His amendments to the contract show he's not entirely without honor. But honor and respect are different things. We'll see which he truly possesses. She walked to her wardrobe and pulled out a heavy garment bag. Is my dress ready? The seamstress finished yesterday. Cornelius struggled to his feet, using his cane for support. Vivi, please, think carefully. Once you marry him, there's no going back. I've been thinking for 6 years, Father. I'm ready. Genevieve unzipped the garment bag, revealing the wedding dress inside. It was a masterpiece of silk and Brussels lace, traditional and expensive and utterly impersonal. She pulled the veil from the bum, heavy, opaque, designed to completely obscure her face. 6 layers of the finest lace money could buy, each layer carefully selected to create an impenetrable barrier. The Phantom's final performance. 13 days, Genevieve said softly, running the lace through her fingers. 13 days until November 1st. 13 days until I walk down the aisle of St. Patrick's Cathedral and show Nathaniel Blackwood exactly what kind of bargain he's made. Her father crossed to the door, each step slow and labored. At the threshold, he paused. Your mother would be proud of you, he said. She always said you had steel in your spine. Mother endured a loveless marriage for 20 years, Genevieve replied. She knows exactly why I'm doing this. After her father left, Genevieve returned to the mirror. She held the veil up to her face, watching her features disappear behind the layers of lace. In 13 days, she would walk into St. Patrick's Cathedral as the Phantom. And she would walk out as the Duchess of Blackwood, armed with beauty money and a husband who had no idea that his gargoyle bride intended to teach him the true meaning of consequences. The morning of November 1st dawned cold and gray over Manhattan. Nathaniel Blackwood stood at the window of his hotel room, watching fog roll in from the harbor. Somewhere in that white shroud, ships arrived and departed, carrying cargo and passengers to destinations unknown. He envied them. At least they knew where they were going. In 3 hours, he would marry a woman whose face he had never seen. The hotel room smelled of coffee and boot polish and the faint, lingering scent of whiskey he had not drunk. A single glass sat untouched on the nightstand, amber liquid gleaming in the gaslight. He had poured it at midnight, intending to drown his nerves. But something had stopped him, some stubborn fragment of pride that insisted he face this sober. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "It's open," he called. Percy Whitmore entered, already dressed in his formal morning coat. He carried a leather case and wore the expression of a man preparing to attend a funeral. "You look terrible," Percy said. "I didn't sleep." "Neither did I." Percy set the case on the bed and opened it, revealing a new dress coat, starched shirt, and silk cravat. "I kept thinking about what we're doing, what you're doing, marrying a stranger for money. Marriages have been arranged for worse reasons." "Name one, pues." Nathaniel turned from the window. "Every political alliance in European history, every merger of estates, every union designed to produce heirs and secure inheritances. This is what our class does, Percy. We marry for advantage, not affection. That doesn't make it right." "No," Nathaniel agreed quietly, "but it makes it necessary." He crossed to the bed and began dressing with mechanical precision. Shirt, waistcoat, cravat tied in a perfect Windsor knot. The new coat fit perfectly tailored to hide the weight he had lost over the past 3 years. When he looked in the mirror, a stranger stared back, dark-haired and gray-eyed, handsome in the cold, aristocratic way that came from generations of good breeding. He looked like a duke, like a man of consequence. He looked like a fraud. "The funds were deposited this morning," Percy said, breaking the silence. $200,000 in the Blackwood account, as promised." Nathaniel felt something loosen in his chest, relief sharp and unexpected. "And the restoration funds? 50,000 more held in escrow pending your signature on the marriage certificate." Percy handed him a folder. "I've already contacted the builders. They can start work on the tenant cottages next week. The families will have proper housing before the first snow." Nathaniel took the folder but didn't open it. His hands were shaking slightly. "I kept my promise," he said softly. "Mother would be proud," Percy finished. "She would be proud that you put those families before your own comfort. I sold my life for them. You made a bargain? There's a difference." Percy checked his pocket watch. "We need to leave. The ceremony starts in 90 minutes. "Percy," Nathaniel met his friend's eyes in the mirror. What if the rumors are true? What if she's truly hideous? Then you'll be a gentleman about it. You'll treat her with respect and dignity." Percy's voice was firm. "You're many things, Nate, but you're not cruel. You won't make her suffer for an appearance she can't control. And if she's difficult, if she uses that clause to control me, then you'll adapt," Percy said. "But there's also a chance, a small chance, that this won't be the disaster you're imagining." "You don't believe that?" "No," Percy admitted, "but hope is cheaper than whiskey, and you need something to get you down that aisle." They left the hotel and climbed into a black carriage that would carry them to St. Patrick's Cathedral. The city passed in a blur of gray stone and gaslight. Street vendors hawked newspapers. Pedestrians hurried through the fog. The ordinary machinery of life continued, indifferent to the fact that Nathaniel Blackwood was riding toward his fate. The cathedral loomed ahead, its Gothic spires piercing the fog like stone fingers reaching for heaven. Carriages already lined the street, disgorging passengers in formal attire. New York society had turned out in force for the spectacle. Not to wish the couple well, Nathaniel knew, to witness the monster. "Steady," Percy murmured as their carriage stopped. "Remember why you're doing this." Nathaniel nodded and stepped out into the cold November air. The interior of St. Patrick's Cathedral smelled of lilies and damp wool and the accumulated prayers of 1,000 strangers. 400 guests filled the pews, their silk and satin rustling like restless spirits. Candlelight flickered off marble columns, casting dancing shadows across faces that turned to watch as Nathaniel walked down the center aisle. He heard the whispers, couldn't avoid them. "Poor man marrying her for money. I heard she wears an iron mask. They say her face melted in a fire." "No, that's what I heard. This is grotesque. They shouldn't allow it." Nathaniel kept his eyes forward, his expression carefully blank. He had learned that trick in the weeks after his father's funeral, when every social gathering became an exercise in enduring pity and mockery. Show nothing, feel nothing, survive. Percy walked beside him, a solid presence in the chaos. Ignore them, Percy whispered. But Nathaniel couldn't ignore the pressure building in his chest, the sensation of being trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. In minutes, he would stand at that altar and pledge his life to a stranger. A woman hidden behind veils and rumors. A woman he was marrying for money like some medieval prince in a fairy tale. Except fairy tales ended with true love's kiss. This would end with separate bedrooms and a lifetime of polite avoidance. They reached the altar. Father Brennan waited there, his face grave beneath his ceremonial robes. The old priest had known Nathaniel since childhood, had baptized him and buried his parents, and now would bind him to a stranger. Your Grace, Father Brennan said quietly. Are you certain about this? No, Nathaniel admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. The organ began to play. The congregation rose as one turning toward the cathedral's entrance. Nathaniel turned too, and saw nothing. The fog had rolled into the cathedral itself, or perhaps his vision had simply blurred with stress. He blinked hard, trying to focus. Then she appeared, a figure in white moving through the crowd like a ghost, small, swathed in so much lace and silk that she seemed more bridal confection than human being. But it was the veil that drew every eye. Heavy Brussels lace, opaque as a curtain. Layer upon layer of it draped over her head and shoulders in a cascade of white that completely obscured her face. Not even a shadow of features showed through. She could have been anyone beneath that shroud. Beautiful, hideous, human, monster, unknown. Nathaniel felt his heart hammering against his ribs. This was real. This was happening. In moments, he would lift that veil and discover what 6 years of rumors had hidden. She walked alone down the aisle. No father to give her away, no attendants to support her. Just a small figure in white, gliding forward with strange, eerie grace. As she passed each row of pews, the whispers intensified. Look at all that lace. She's tiny. Can she even see through that veil? This is morbid. I feel sick. Nathaniel wanted to shout at them, wanted to tell them to show some basic human decency. But his throat had closed and his hands had clenched into fists, and all he could do was watch this unknown woman approach the altar where he waited. She reached the steps, paused. For a heartbeat, Nathaniel thought she might flee, might turn and run back down that aisle and disappear into the fog. Instead, she climbed the 3 steps with careful precision and took her place beside him, close enough to touch, close enough to smell, and God, the smell. Not medicine or stale lavender or the sick room scents he had braced himself for. She smelled of winter rain and jasmine, clean and sharp and utterly intoxicating. Dearly beloved, Father Brennan began, his voice echoing through the hushed cathedral. We are gathered here today. But Nathaniel barely heard the words. He was too focused on the figure beside him. On the way, her hands gloved in white silk trembled slightly. On the rise and fall of her breathing beneath all that lace. On the absolute silence emanating from beneath the veil. Do you, Nathaniel Alexander Blackwood, take this woman? I do, Nathaniel said, cutting the priest off. He wanted this over. Wanted to rip away the veil and face whatever waited beneath. Wanted to escape this suffocating cathedral and all these staring eyes. Father Brennan frowned at the interruption, but continued. And do you, Genevieve Marie Carstairs? Silence. Long, agonizing silence. Nathaniel's stomach dropped. Was she going to refuse? Was this entire nightmare going to collapse here at the altar in front of 400 witnesses? Then from beneath the veil, a voice. Low, calm, controlled. I do. Not the nervous squeak of a frightened girl, not the tremulous whisper of an invalid. A contralto rich and steady with undertones of something Nathaniel couldn't quite identify. Certainty, perhaps, or calculation. Then by the power vested in me, Father Brennan said, speaking quickly as if he too wanted this strange ceremony over, I now pronounce you husband and wife. He paused, looking uncomfortable. You may kiss the bride. This was the moment. Nathaniel turned to face his new wife. 400 people held their breath. The cathedral itself seemed to lean in waiting. He reached for the veil with hands that trembled, despite his best efforts at control. The lace was heavy, expensive, layered to create an impenetrable barrier. Let's get this over with, he muttered loud enough for her to hear. His fingers found the edge of the veil. He lifted. The lace fell back over her head, cascading down her back in a white waterfall. And Nathaniel's world stopped. The gasp came not from him, but from the congregation behind them. A collective intake of breath, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. Because the woman standing before him was not scarred, was not pitted by disease, was not deformed or damaged, or any of the things the rumors had promised. She was perfect. Porcelain skin without a single blemish. High, aristocratic cheekbones that looked carved from marble by a master sculptor. Lips the color of crushed rose petals. And eyes, dear God, her eyes the most piercing crystalline blue he had ever seen. Like chips of winter sky, like ice over deep water. She was without exaggeration the most beautiful woman Nathaniel had ever seen. His brain short-circuited. Confusion flooded through him, followed by a wave of pure relief so intense it made him dizzy. The rumors were wrong, all wrong. He wasn't married to a monster. He had married a goddess. He had won the lottery, won everything. A smile spread across his face, the charming, practiced smile that had seduced a dozen debutantes and opened 100 doors. He leaned toward her, ready to claim the kiss that would seal this unexpected victory. "Well," he murmured, pitching his voice low and intimate, "it seems the rumors were exaggerated, my dear. You are quite lovely." She didn't move, didn't blink. As his face drew closer to hers, she spoke. Her voice was soft, meant only for his ears, but it was harder than steel. "I heard you, Your Grace." Nathaniel froze his lips inches from hers. "Pardon." Those ice-blue eyes bored into his utterly devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a judge, of an executioner. "At the altar," she whispered, "you said I was a transaction. Input-output. You said you didn't care if I looked like a gargoyle as long as my check cleared." The world tilted. How could she know that he had said those words to Percy in private weeks ago? "How, I have excellent sources," she continued as if reading his thoughts. "Did you really think I would enter this marriage blind? That I wouldn't investigate the man I was binding myself to?" Nathaniel tried to speak, but his throat had closed. She took a half step back, denying him the kiss, denying him in front of 400 witnesses. Then she turned her head slightly toward Father Brennan, signaling that the ceremony was complete. That the marriage was sealed. She had just refused to kiss him, had left him leaning toward empty air, like a fool. When she looked back at him, a small, cruel smile touched the corner of her mouth. "I am the gargoyle Nathaniel," she said, using his first name with a familiarity that sounded like a curse. "And you have just sold your life to me." Before he could respond, she took his arm. Her grip was iron-wrapped in silk strong enough to make him wince. "Now smile," she murmured, "and walk me down this aisle like the devoted husband you're pretending to be. We have a performance to complete." Nathaniel found himself moving on autopilot, his mind reeling. The congregation erupted into whispers and scattered applause. They saw a beautiful bride and a handsome groom, a fairy tale come to life. They didn't see the trap closing. They didn't see the gargoyle. As they walked down the aisle together, Genevieve's fingers dug into his arm with increasing pressure. Not quite painful, just insistent, a reminder of who held the leash. Nathaniel glanced down at her. In profile, she was breathtaking, but there was nothing soft about her beauty. It was sharp, calculated, weaponized. He had expected to marry a victim. He had married a predator. And the life he had imagined, the mistress in Chelsea, the drinking, the easy money, evaporated like morning fog. The cathedral doors opened. Cold November air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and coal smoke, and the future he hadn't seen coming. "Welcome to your new life, husband," Genevieve said softly. And Nathaniel Blackwood, 9th Duke of Blackwood, realized with sinking dread that he had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The carriage ride to Blackwood Manor was the longest 2 hours of Nathaniel's life. The heavy oak doors had barely closed behind them before the silence descended like a physical weight. Genevieve sat across from him on the velvet bench, her wedding dress spread around her like a pool of white water. She had not spoken since they left the cathedral, had not even looked at him. Instead, she stared out the rain-streaked window at the passing landscape, her face as cold and expressionless as a death mask. Nathaniel tried to formulate words, tried to find some way to salvage this disaster. "Genevieve," he began, attempting the warm, intimate tone that usually charmed women. "I must apologize for my behavior before the wedding. A man says foolish things when he's nervous." "Nervous," she interrupted, still not looking at him. Her voice was flat. "Nervousness implies you cared enough to be anxious. You weren't nervous, Nathaniel. You were bored." The use of his first name, no title, no formality, felt like a slap. "That's not entirely fair," he tried. "I barely knew you. Of course I was transactional," she finished, finally turning those devastating eyes on him. "You were transactional. Input my father's money, output your restored estate. I was simply the inconvenient variable in your equation." Nathaniel felt heat rising in his face. You investigated me. You knew exactly what kind of man I was before you agreed to this marriage, so don't pretend to be surprised or wounded now. Oh, I'm not surprised, her smile was arctic. I'm satisfied. You've confirmed every assumption I made about your character. She returned her attention to the window, effectively dismissing him. Nathaniel felt his temper fraying. He had just married this woman to save 50 families from homelessness, had signed away his freedom to honor his mother's dying wish. And now she sat there judging him like he was some kind of villain. He leaned forward, reaching for her gloved hand. Look, we got off to a bad start, but we can... She snatched her hand away so fast he barely saw the movement. Like a viper striking. Like touching him was poison. Do not touch me, she said. The words were quiet but carried the force of a command, of a queen addressing a servant. Nathaniel straightened in anger, replacing confusion. I'm your husband. We're married. Surely we can at least maintain civil... Let us establish the rules of this arrangement immediately. Genevieve interrupted, her voice cutting through his protest like a knife through silk. It will save us both the exhaustion of pretending. She turned to face him fully, and in the dim carriage light she looked both beautiful and terrifying. We are partners in a business transaction, she continued. You needed money. My father needed a title in the family. That is the extent of our union. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a marriage, Nathaniel protested. We're husband and wife. That means whatever we agree it means, Genevieve said. And I agree that you will reside in the east wing of Blackwood Manor. I will take the master suite. You will not enter my chambers without invitation. You will not make demands. You will not presume. You can't be serious. I have never been more serious in my life. Nathaniel stared at her, his mind racing. Why agree to marry me if you despise me so thoroughly? For the first time, something flickered across her face, not quite pain, not quite satisfaction, something complicated. I don't despise you, Nathaniel. I don't feel anything about you at all. You're simply a means to an end. What end? Freedom. The word was soft but fierce. 6 years ago, a man named Marquis Ashford asked for my hand in marriage. I was 18. He was 62. He had buried 3 wives already, all of them young, all of them dying under mysterious circumstances. When I refused him, he decided to punish me. She paused, her fingers tightening on the fabric of her dress. He spread rumors that I was diseased, disfigured, men. Society believed him because society always believes men of power. My father was too weak to fight back. So I disappeared, became the phantom, learned to use the rumors instead of fighting them. But why, Nathaniel asked, genuinely confused. Why let them think you were a monster? Because I wanted to discover who would marry the monster, Genevieve said simply. I wanted to test whether anyone in our glittering society possessed even a shred of genuine kindness. Whether anyone would court Genevieve Carstairs without knowing what I looked like. Whether anyone could see past the rumors to the person beneath. Understanding dawned cold and unwelcome. And I failed, Nathaniel said quietly. Spectacularly. Her smile was bitter. You didn't just fail to be kind. You were actively dismissive. A gargoyle, you called me. A recluse with a face that frightens children. You reduced me to a transaction before you even saw me. I never meant... What you meant is irrelevant. What you said reveals who you are. She leaned back against the carriage seat, her posture relaxing slightly. But I should thank you, really. Your callousness made this decision much easier. What decision? To use you exactly as you intended to use me. Genevieve pulled a folded document from her reticule. Are you familiar with Clause 14 of our marriage contract? Nathaniel felt ice forming in his stomach. The Financial Administration Clause. Precisely. She unfolded the document and read aloud. All funds provided by the Earl of Carstairs shall be administered solely by the Duchess of Blackwood until such time as Blackwood Manor and associated properties are deemed financially solvent by independent audit. She looked up, eyes glittering. You signed this without reading it carefully. Percy tried to warn you, but you were too focused on getting back to your mistress to pay attention. That was your first mistake. Scarlett, Nathaniel breathed. Scarlett Beaumont. Chelsea, walk number 42. Genevieve refolded the document with precise movements. Yes, I know about her. I know about the monthly payments you've been making. I know about the promises you made to return to her once you had my money. She tucked the paper back into her reticule. Those payments stop immediately. In fact, all your debts, all your expenses, all your expenditures now require my approval. You'll receive a modest allowance enough to maintain your wardrobe and purchase lunch at your club. But not a penny more. Nathaniel felt the walls of the carriage closing in. You can't do this. I am, and you agreed to it when you signed that contract. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. You wanted a transaction. Nathaniel, congratulations. You got one. The carriage hit a bump, jostling them both. Rain hammered harder against the roof, a percussion of inevitability. What about Scarlett? Nathaniel asked, hating the desperation creeping into his voice. What about her? I have... There are obligations I can't just abandon. You have no obligations to a kept woman, Genevieve said coldly. Your only obligation is to this estate and the people who depend on it, something you seem to have forgotten in your pursuit of pleasure. You don't understand. Scarlett and I have an arrangement based on money changing hands for companionship. Genevieve's voice was scalpel sharp. I understand perfectly. And now that money is mine to control, that arrangement is over. I love her, Nathaniel said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Genevieve laughed. It was a terrible sound, empty of all humor. You love the idea of her. You love that she makes you feel like a man instead of a failure. You love that she doesn't ask difficult questions or make uncomfortable demands. But real love requires sacrifice, requires seeing someone clearly and choosing them anyway. You've never done that in your life. The carriage began to slow. Through the window, Nathaniel could see the stone pillars that marked the entrance to Blackwood Manor. Home, except it wasn't his home anymore. Not really. It belonged to the woman sitting across from him. The woman who held all the cards and all the power and all the cold, calculating intelligence he had been too blind to see. The carriage stopped. Genevieve gathered her skirts, preparing to exit. One more thing, she said, pausing at the door. Tonight you may go to Chelsea if you wish. Say goodbye to your mistress. Explain that your circumstances have changed. But understand this, if you bring her shame to my doorstep, if you embarrass this family publicly, I will use every legal and financial tool at my disposal to destroy you both. She opened the door herself, not waiting for the footman. Welcome home, husband, she said, stepping out into the rain. Nathaniel sat alone in the carriage, listening to the rain drum against the roof. Through the window, he could see Genevieve ascending the manor steps. Even soaked with rain, even weighed down by that massive dress, she moved with purpose and power. She disappeared into the house, and Nathaniel remained in the carriage, paralyzed by the realization of what he had done. He had sold his freedom for money, and the price was far higher than he had ever imagined. Nathaniel did go to Chelsea that night. He rode through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, his horse's hooves clattering on wet cobblestones. The address was burned into his memory. Chelsea Walk number 42, a neat townhouse with green shutters and window boxes that Scarlett filled with flowers in summer. He had bought this house for her 2 years ago, back when he still had money to spend on such things. Back when keeping a mistress seemed like the sophisticated thing for a duke to do. Now it just seemed sad. He tied his horse and climbed the steps. The door was unlocked. It always was for him. Inside the house was warm and softly lit, smelling of perfume and wine, and the dinners Scarlett's cook prepared. Nate, Scarlett's voice called from the parlor. Is that you? I didn't expect you tonight. Isn't this your wedding night? He found her in the parlor, reclining on a velvet settee in a dressing gown of emerald silk. Her red hair was loose around her shoulders, her green eyes bright with wine and curiosity. Scarlett Beaumont was beautiful in the obvious way that men preferred. Curves in all the right places, a laugh that came easily, a personality designed to make men feel clever and desired. Looking at her now, Nathaniel felt nothing but exhaustion. Hello, Scarlett. She sat up, frowning at his tone. What's wrong? Did the ceremony go badly? Was she as hideous as they said? No, Nathaniel said quietly. She was beautiful. Scarlett's frown deepened. Then why do you look like you're attending a funeral? Because I just signed away my life. He crossed to the sideboard and poured himself whiskey, drank it in one burning swallow. And I need to tell you something. You're scaring me, Nate. The payments stop. The arrangement between us is over. For a moment, Scarlett just stared at him. Then she laughed, high and brittle. Very funny. You're not serious. I'm completely serious. My wife controls the money now, all of it. I have an allowance barely sufficient for my own needs. I can't maintain this house. Can't maintain us. The laughter died. Scarlett stood, her dressing gown falling open to reveal the expensive nightgown beneath. Another thing he had bought her. But you promised, she said, and for the first time Nathaniel heard the calculation beneath the sweetness. You said once you were married you'd keep me in comfort. You said the Duchess would stay in the country while we continued in the city. Plans changed. Change them back. Her voice rose, losing its careful modulation. Talk to her. Make her understand. You're the Duke. You're the man. Make her. She holds all the legal power, Nathaniel interrupted. I signed a contract that gives her complete financial control until the estate is solvent, which given the state of my debts could take years. Scarlett's face transformed. The sweetness vanished, replaced by something harder and hungrier. So you're just going to abandon me after 2 years? I'm releasing you, Nathaniel corrected. You're young and beautiful. You'll find someone else to keep me. She laughed again, but this time it was ugly. You think I want someone else? You think I spent 2 years flattering your ego because I enjoyed it? The words hit like a slap. You thought I loved you. Scarlett poured herself wine with shaking hands. Men always think that. They confuse purchased affection with real feeling. Well, let me clarify, Your Grace. I liked your money. I liked the security. I did not and have never loved you. Nathaniel should have felt anger, should have felt betrayed. Instead, he felt only a strange, hollow relief. Then we both get what we deserve, he said quietly. You get your freedom. I get mine. Freedom, Scarlett drained her glass. You just married a woman who controls your every dollar. That's not freedom. That's a ghost. Perhaps, Nathaniel admitted, but it's a cage I built myself. And perhaps it's time I learned to live with the consequences. He set down his glass and walked toward the door. Nate, wait. Scarlett's voice had lost its edge, becoming almost desperate. Don't leave like this. We can work something out. I don't need the townhouse. Just enough to... Goodbye, Scarlett. He left before she could respond. Left the warmth and perfume and easy affection. Left the fantasy he had been living for 2 years. Outside, the rain had intensified to a downpour. Nathaniel untied his horse but didn't mount immediately. He stood in the rain, letting it soak through his coat, letting it wash away the last traces of the man he had been. When he finally climbed into the saddle and turned the horse toward Blackwood Manor, he felt strangely lighter. Scarlett had never loved him. Genevieve despised him. But at least now he knew where he stood. At least now there were no more illusions. Blackwood Manor loomed ahead through the rain, its windows blazing with light. As Nathaniel approached, he saw that something had changed. The grounds, usually dark and overgrown, were being worked on even at this late hour. Men with lanterns moved among the gardens, trimming hedges and clearing pathways. Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic. The entrance hall, which had been dim and dusty for years, now gleamed with fresh polish. The marble floors reflected candlelight. The brass fixtures shone. Fresh flowers filled vases on every table. The manor looked alive. Mrs. Ophelia Sterling, the housekeeper, emerged from the shadows like a ghost materializing. Your Grace, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Her Grace is in the morning room going over the household ledgers. She asked to be informed when you returned. Is she still awake? Her Grace has been awake since 5 this morning. I doubt she plans to sleep anytime soon. Mrs. Sterling had served the Blackwood family for 30 years. She had watched Nathaniel grow from boy to man, had witnessed his father's decline and his mother's death. She knew all his failures and forgave none of them. Now she looked at him with something that might have been pity or might have been satisfaction. The staff wishes me to inform you, Mrs. Sterling continued, that we are pleased with the new Duchess. She has already addressed several long-standing concerns and has promised fair wages paid on time. The message was clear. The staff had chosen sides, and they had not chosen his. Thank you, Mrs. Sterling, Nathaniel said stiffly. He found Genevieve in the morning room exactly as Mrs. Sterling had said. She had changed out of her wedding dress into a severe gown of navy blue, high-necked, and businesslike. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple knot. She sat at a desk that had been his mother's, surrounded by ledgers and account books and stacks of correspondence. She looked up as he entered. You went to her, Genevieve said. Not a question. I did. And it's over. Nathaniel remained standing by the door, uncertain of his welcome. You were right. She didn't love me. She loved the money. Most people do, Genevieve said without sympathy. She returned her attention to the ledger in front of her. I've been reviewing your financial records. They're worse than I expected. I understand that. She picked up a sheet of paper covered in numbers. You spend $800 a month on brandy and cigars. You maintain memberships at 4 different clubs, none of which you can afford. You have outstanding debts with 16 different merchants, and you haven't paid your staff in 3 months. Each word was a hammer blow. The staff will be paid tomorrow, Genevieve continued. I've also ordered repairs to begin on the tenant cottages. The builders estimate 6 weeks for completion. After that, I'll address the manor itself. The roof is leaking in 3 places. The east wing is uninhabitable. The library has water damage that's destroying your books. I failed to maintain it, Nathaniel said quietly. I see that now. Then why didn't you fix it? For the first time, real emotion entered her voice, anger. You've been living in this decay for 3 years. You had time to visit your mistress, time to drink yourself stupid, time to attend auctions and watch your mother's jewels be sold. But you didn't have time to repair the home that houses 50 families. I didn't have the money. You had options. Genevieve stood her hands flat on the desk. You could have sold the memberships at those clubs, could have stopped drinking expensive brandy, could have lived like a responsible adult instead of a spoiled child pretending poverty excused his failures. The words hung between them like thrown knives. Nathaniel felt something crack inside him, some wall he had built around his shame and self-pity. You're right, he said. Genevieve blinked clearly, not expecting agreement. You're absolutely right, Nathaniel repeated. I've been a coward. I've been hiding from responsibility behind bottles and excuses. I've let this estate decay while I pretended the problems would solve themselves. I married you for money because I was too weak to find another solution. He crossed to the desk, meeting her fierce gaze. You want to control the finances? Fine, you'll do a better job than I ever did. You want to keep me at arm's length, I understand. I've given you no reason to trust me. But Genevieve, don't, she interrupted. Don't what? Don't try to charm me. Don't attempt sincerity now that your mistress has rejected you and your money is gone. I won't be your consolation prize. I'm not trying to charm you. I'm trying to be honest. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair. For the first time in 3 years, someone has forced me to look at what I've become, and I don't like what I see. Genevieve studied him for a long moment. Then she gathered the ledgers with sharp, precise movements. Your rooms are in the East Wing, second floor. Mrs. Sterling will show you. I've had them prepared with everything you'll need. We'll breakfast separately. I don't require your presence at meals unless we have guests. Genevieve, good night, Your Grace. She left her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Nathaniel stood alone in the morning room, surrounded by the evidence of his failures. The ledgers, the unpaid bills, the catalog of his incompetence. For 3 years he had been drowning in debt, in whiskey, and self-pity. Genevieve had just thrown him a rope, but it was a rope made of thorns, and climbing it would cost him everything. The question was, did he have the courage to climb? He looked at the ledgers she had left behind, picked one up, opened it, and began to read. 3 weeks. That was how long Nathaniel lasted before the weight of his new life became unbearable. 3 weeks of waking in the East Wing to cold morning light filtering through windows that overlooked nothing but bare trees and gray sky. 3 weeks of breakfasting alone in rooms that still smelled faintly of mildew and neglect. 3 weeks of watching Genevieve transform Blackwood Manor into something magnificent while treating him like an inconvenient piece of furniture. She was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost that haunted his home with ruthless efficiency. He would see her in the morning, walking the grounds with builders and architects pointing out repairs with the precision of a general deploying troops. He would catch glimpses of her in the afternoon, bent over ledgers in the study that had been his father's, her blonde hair catching the light like spun gold. Sometimes he heard her voice echoing through the corridors, firm, clear, commanding respect from staff who had barely acknowledged Nathaniel's existence for years. But she never spoke to him, not at meals which they took separately as per her decree, not in passing when they occasionally crossed paths in corridors, not even in the evenings when they both retreated to opposite wings of the manor like enemy generals to their respective camps. The silence was crushing. On the morning of the 21st day of his marriage, Nathaniel woke to find a note slipped under his door. White's Club has written to inquire about your outstanding membership dues. They've also informed me that your credit has been suspended pending payment. I suggest you settle this matter personally, as I will not be extending funds for club memberships while tenant families still lack adequate winter stores. G. Blackwood, Duchess. The formal signature stung worse than the content. Nathaniel dressed with mechanical precision and rode into Manhattan. The November air had turned bitter, carrying the promise of early snow. His breath misted White as he guided his horse through streets bustling with morning commerce. White's Club occupied a stately building on Fifth Avenue, its marble facade gleaming in the pale sunlight. Nathaniel had been a member since his 21st birthday, following in his father's footsteps. His grandfather's footsteps, generations of Blackwood men who had drunk and gambled and made deals within these exclusive walls. Now he was about to be humiliated here. The doorman recognized him and stepped aside without a word. Inside, the club smelled of leather and tobacco and old money. A few early arrivals sat in the reading room, newspapers crackling in the silence. Nathaniel headed straight for the club manager's office. Richard Hamilton looked up from his desk, his expression carefully neutral. Hamilton had been managing White's for 20 years. He had seen fortunes made and lost, had witnessed more scandals than most men could imagine, and had mastered the art of discretion. "Your Grace," Hamilton said, rising. "I wasn't expecting you. I received your letter about the membership dues." "Ah, yes." Hamilton gestured to a chair. "Please sit. This is an awkward matter." "I'm aware of my debts," Nathaniel said, remaining standing. "What's the total?" Hamilton pulled out a leather-bound ledger and flipped to a marked page. "Your membership dues are $300 annually. You're currently 2 years in arrears. Additionally, there are various bar tabs and dining charges totaling approximately $450. $1,050, the number hung in the air between them. "I see," Nathaniel said quietly. "I must also inform you," Hamilton continued, clearly uncomfortable, "that we received notice from the Duchess of Blackwood's attorney. All credit extended to the Blackwood name has been frozen pending your personal approval of expenditures." There it was, the true humiliation. Everyone would know now. Every member of White's, every gentleman in New York society would know that Nathaniel Blackwood's wife controlled his purse strings, that he couldn't buy a drink without her permission. "I understand," Nathaniel said. "Please prepare a final bill. I'll be canceling my membership." Hamilton's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your Grace, there's no need to be hasty. We can work out a payment arrangement." "No." The word came out harder than Nathaniel intended. "I can't afford this membership. I shouldn't have maintained it this long. Send the final accounting to Blackwood Manor, and I'll arrange payment." He turned to leave. "Your Grace," Hamilton called. "For what it's worth, your father would be proud. This is the first responsible financial decision I've seen a Blackwood make in years." Nathaniel paused at the door. "My father gambled away our fortune in clubs like this one. I doubt he'd be proud of anything I'm doing." "Your father was a weak man," Hamilton said bluntly. "You're choosing to be stronger. That counts for something." Nathaniel left without responding. In the main room, several members had gathered near the bar. He recognized them: Peter Van Doren, Charles Rutherford, Timothy Morrison. Men he had drunk with, gambled with, laughed with in years past. Now they watched him with the peculiar mix of pity and satisfaction that men reserve for the fallen. "Blackwood," Van Doren called out, his voice carrying across the room. "Heard you got yourself leashed by your new bride. How does it feel having your balls in a woman's reticule?" Laughter rippled through the group. A month ago, Nathaniel would have responded with a cutting remark or challenged Van Doren to a duel, would have defended his masculine pride with violence or wit. Now he just felt tired. "It feels like growing up, Van Doren," Nathaniel said quietly. "You should try it sometime." He walked out before anyone could respond. The ride back to Blackwood Manor took 2 hours through increasingly cold weather. By the time Nathaniel arrived, his fingers were numb, and his mood had darkened to match the gray sky. He found Genevieve in the Manor's east garden, discussing something with the head groundskeeper. She wore a practical wool coat the color of deep burgundy, her hair pinned up beneath a simple hat. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, making her eyes seem even bluer. She looked alive in a way Nathaniel had never felt. When she saw him approaching, she dismissed the groundskeeper with a few quiet words. "I wasn't expecting you back soon," she said. "I canceled my membership at White's." Genevieve's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps. "That must have been difficult," she said carefully. "It was necessary." Nathaniel dismounted, handing his horse's reins to a waiting groom. "I've been maintaining a lifestyle I can't afford, funded by debts I can't pay. You were right to cut my credit. I didn't do it to humiliate you. Perhaps not, but you did it because someone needed to stop me from destroying what's left of this estate, and I'm grateful for that." Now she looked genuinely surprised. "Are you feeling well, Your Grace?" That almost sounded like gratitude. "It was gratitude," Nathaniel said. "I've been thinking about what you said, about taking the path of least resistance, about being a spoiled child instead of a responsible adult." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want to do better. I want to be better, but I don't know how. I've spent 3 years drowning in my father's mistakes and my own failures. You've been here 3 weeks, and you've accomplished more than I managed in 3 years. So I'm asking, teach me." Genevieve stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Teach you what exactly? How to run this estate, how to manage finances, how to be worthy of the title I inherited." Nathaniel pulled off his riding gloves, his hands shaking slightly from cold or nerves. "I'm an engineer by training. I know how to build bridges and calculate loads and design structures. But I don't know how to manage people or money or Responsibility. My father never taught me. He was too busy gambling. And when he died, I was too overwhelmed to learn. So you drank instead? So I drank instead, Nathaniel agreed. And I kept mistresses and pretended the problems would solve themselves. But they didn't. They got worse. And I got weaker. Until I was standing in Christie's auction house watching strangers buy my mother's jewelry because I was too pathetic to stop them. His voice cracked on the last word. Genevieve was silent, watching him with those penetrating eyes that saw everything. Why now? She asked finally. Why this sudden desire for redemption? Because I'm tired, Nathaniel said honestly. Tired of failing, tired of being ashamed, tired of living like a ghost in my own home while you do all the work. And because... He hesitated and unsure if he should continue. Because, Genevieve prompted. Because you deserve better, Nathaniel said quietly. You married me to escape whatever threats you faced. You're using me as a shield, I understand that. But you still deserve a husband who's at least competent enough to help carry the burden. Right now, I'm just dead weight. Genevieve turned away, looking out over the garden. The wind picked up, tugging at her coat, threatening to pull pins from her hair. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. Do you know what I saw when I investigated you, Nathaniel? A failure, a drunk, a man who couldn't manage his own affairs. That too, she admitted. But I also found something else. Do you remember bridge number 9? The question caught him off guard. The Hartford Bridge, what about it? You designed it when you were 26. Your assistant made a calculation error in the load-bearing specifications. The error wasn't discovered until after construction began. If the bridge had been completed as designed, it would have collapsed within 2 years, killed anyone crossing it. Nathaniel felt old shame rising. I should have caught the error before. But you did catch it, Genevieve interrupted. You discovered the mistake 3 months into construction. And instead of blaming your assistant or trying to hide the error, you halted construction. Redesigned the bridge yourself, worked 72 hours straight to find a solution that wouldn't require tearing down what had already been built. You saved that bridge, and you saved lives. She turned back to face him. Your assistant's error would have ruined his career. Probably landed him in prison if people died, but you took responsibility, said it was your oversight as lead engineer, protected him. He had a family, Nathaniel said, 3 children. You couldn't let him suffer for an honest mistake, Genevieve finished. That's what I saw in my investigation. A man who had honor buried under debt and despair, but still there, still capable of doing the right thing when it mattered. Her words hit him harder than any criticism. That's why I agreed to marry you, Genevieve continued. Not because you were desperate enough to accept my terms, but because I believed that somewhere beneath the failure and the drinking was a man who could be more. A man who protected the weak and took responsibility for his mistakes. Then why treat me like an enemy? Nathaniel asked. Why the separate wings and the frozen credit? And the silence. Because I needed to know if that man was still alive, Genevieve said simply. Or if he had drowned completely in whiskey and self-pity. Anyone can talk about honor, but action reveals truth. So I pushed you, it tested you, waited to see if you would collapse further or find the strength to stand. And what did you conclude? That you're still fighting, Genevieve said. You went to Chelsea and ended things with your mistress. You canceled your club membership. You're here now asking for help instead of drowning in pride. Those are not the actions of a weak man, Nathaniel. Those are the actions of a man trying to climb out of a hole. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the frost on her eyelashes, the intelligence in her gaze. So, yes, she said, I'll teach you. We'll start with the estate ledgers, then the tenant management, then the restoration projects. But understand this, I'm not doing this out of pity or wifely duty. I'm doing this because Blackwood Manor deserves a duke who's worthy of it, and I believe you can become that man. Even after everything I said, everything I did. You're not the first person to make mistakes, Nathaniel. You won't be the last. Genevieve pulled her coat tighter against the wind. What matters is what you do next. Do you wallow in guilt and shame, or do you learn and grow and become better? I want to become better, Nathaniel said. I just don't know if I can. Then we'll find out together. She held out her hand. For a moment, Nathaniel just stared at it. This woman who had every reason to hate him, every justification to keep him at arm's length, was offering partnership. Offering trust, however conditional. He took her hand. Her fingers were cold from the wind, but her grip was firm and strong. Come on, Genevieve said. We have work to do. She led him back toward the manor, and for the first time since their wedding, They walked side by side instead of in opposition. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even friendship. But it was a beginning. The next 6 weeks transformed Nathaniel's understanding of what it meant to manage an estate. Genevieve was a relentless teacher. Every morning at 6, she would summon him to the study. No matter how little sleep he had gotten, no matter how exhausted he felt, she expected him there. Ready, alert, prepared to learn. Money flows like water, she explained on the first morning, spreading ledgers across the desk. If you don't direct it carefully, it drains away into waste and inefficiency. Your father let it drain, you let it drain. Now we're going to build proper channels. She showed him how to read balance sheets, how to track income against expenditure, how to identify unnecessary costs and redirect funds to essential repairs. Her mind worked with mechanical precision, seeing patterns and connections that Nathaniel had never noticed. Here, she said, pointing to a line item, coal delivery, you're paying $12 per ton. But if you contract with Thompson Coal for annual delivery, the cost drops to $9 per ton. Over a year, that's a savings of nearly $300 just on heating. How do you know this? Nathaniel asked, genuinely amazed. I read, Genevieve said simply. I studied. For 6 years while I was in seclusion, I educated myself in finance, agriculture, estate management, contract law. Everything I would need to run a household independently. Okay, why? Because I knew my cousin Reginald would try to have me declared incompetent and seize my mother's inheritance. The only way to protect myself was to become so competent that no court would believe I was incapable of managing my own affairs. She turned the page in the ledger. Now let's discuss the tenant contracts. Do you know how much rent you're charging the families on Blackwood land? Nathaniel felt shame creeping up his neck. Honestly, I don't. My father set the rates years ago. I assumed they were fair. They're not. Genevieve produced another set of documents. You're charging $15 per month for cottages that are barely habitable. Families are paying you money they don't have for homes that are falling apart. Meanwhile, you're not reinvesting any of that rent into maintenance. I didn't realize. You didn't look, Genevieve corrected, not unkindly. Landlords have responsibilities, Nathaniel. You can't just collect rent and ignore the condition of the properties. That's not business. That's exploitation. The word stung, but Nathaniel couldn't argue. What do? We reduce the rent to $10 per month until the cottages are fully repaired. Then we raise it to $12, still below the original rate, but enough to cover basic maintenance. We also establish a repair fund. $2 from every collected rent goes into an account specifically for property upkeep. She looked at him expectantly. Do you understand the logic? Lower rent means less income short term, Nathaniel said slowly, his engineer's mind engaging with the problem. But it builds goodwill with the tenants, and the repair fund ensures we don't end up in this situation again. Long-term stability over short-term profit. Exactly. Genevieve almost smiled. You're not stupid, Nathaniel. You're just untrained. There's a difference. The days blurred together in a haze of numbers and contracts and decisions. But slowly patterns began to emerge. Nathaniel started to understand the intricate machinery that kept an estate functioning, started to see how every choice created ripple effects through the entire system. And he started to notice Genevieve. Not just her beauty, though God knew she was beautiful, but the way her mind worked. The way she could hold 3 different conversations in her head, simultaneously tracking multiple problems and solutions like a chess master planning 6 moves ahead. The way she treated the staff with firm respect, never condescending, but never familiar either. The way she listened when the tenant families brought complaints, actually listened, instead of just waiting for them to finish talking. The way she had taken his broken estate and in less than 2 months begun transforming it into something functional, something alive. One morning in mid-December, Nathaniel arrived at the study to find Genevieve examining a stack of blueprints. His blueprints. Where did you find those? He asked. Mrs. Sterling mentioned you kept engineering designs in storage. I was curious. Genevieve looked up, and for once there was no coldness in her eyes, just genuine interest. These are remarkable, Nathaniel. You designed all these before my father died, yes. Nathaniel moved closer, recognizing the familiar lines and calculations. Bridges mostly, a few public buildings. I was going to open my own firm, but then your father's debts crushed that dream, Genevieve finished. She traced a finger along one of the bridge designs. This is beautiful. The suspension cables, the load distribution, it's elegant. You understand engineering. I understand mathematics, and mathematics is the language of engineering. She pointed to a calculation in the margin. You used a Fibonacci sequence to determine the spacing of the support struts. That's brilliant. Nathaniel felt a warmth spreading through his chest. No one had looked at his work with genuine appreciation in years. Scarlett had always glazed over when he tried to discuss his designs. His father had considered engineering beneath a duke's dignity, but Genevieve saw it, understood it. "I have an idea," she said suddenly. "The road from Blackwood Manor to the village crosses Miller's Creek, correct?" "Yes, there's a wooden bridge there. Pretty rickety, but it works." "It won't work through winter. I looked at it last week. The timbers are rotting. One hard freeze and that bridge will collapse." Genevieve shuffled through the blueprints until she found a specific design. "Could you build this a stone bridge? Something permanent." Nathaniel studied the design. It was one of his earlier works, simpler than his later projects, but sound, functional, beautiful in its efficiency. "I could," he said slowly, "but the cost—" "We have the money," Genevieve interrupted. "The restoration fund includes infrastructure. A proper bridge would serve the community for decades. It's a worthwhile investment. You're giving me permission to build." "I'm asking you to use your skills," Genevieve corrected. "You're an engineer, Nathaniel. You should be engineering, not drowning in ledgers and self-pity." Something shifted in Nathaniel's chest, a loosening of pressure he hadn't realized he was carrying. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me. Just build a bridge that won't collapse." But she was almost smiling. Almost. The bridge project became Nathaniel's salvation. Every morning after his lessons with Genevieve, he would ride to Miller's Creek and work alongside the construction crew he had hired. Manual labor that left his muscles aching and his hands blistered. But it felt good, felt purposeful. He was creating something, building instead of destroying, contributing instead of consuming. The work progressed steadily through December, digging the foundation down to bedrock, laying the granite stones, calculating angles and stresses, solving problems that arose during construction. It was exhausting, it was exhilarating. For the first time in 3 years, Nathaniel felt like himself again. Genevieve came to inspect the progress one afternoon in late December. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the construction site in white. "The foundation is solid," Nathaniel explained, walking her across the temporary platforms. "We've gone 8 feet down to bedrock. The stone is local granite, cheaper than importing marble and just as strong. The arch will distribute the load evenly across the abutments." He was speaking quickly, enthusiastically, his hands moving as he described the engineering. It took him a moment to realize Genevieve was smiling. Actually smiling. "What?" he asked. "Nothing. Just, this is the first time I've seen you passionate about something. It's nice." "I love building things," Nathaniel admitted. "Always have. When I was a boy, I used to construct elaborate structures from sticks and stones in the garden. My father hated it, said it was beneath my station. But my mother encouraged me. She said if I could dream it, I could build it. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was the best person I've ever known." Nathaniel looked out at the half-finished bridge. "I wish she could see this. Wish she could see that I'm finally trying to live up to what she believed I could be." Genevieve was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think she can see, and I think she's proud." Their eyes met. For the first time since their wedding, Nathaniel felt something shift between them. Not quite friendship, not quite forgiveness, but something softer than the ice that had separated them. "Genevieve," he began. But before he could continue, a rider appeared on the road, galloping hard through the snow. As he drew closer, Nathaniel recognized him, one of the stable boys from the manor. "Your Grace," the boy called, breathless. "Your Graces. There's a man at the manor. Says he's family, the Duchess's cousin. He's demanding to see you both immediately." Nathaniel felt Genevieve go rigid beside him. "Reginald," she whispered, and for the first time since he had met her, Nathaniel heard fear in her voice. They rode back to Blackwood Manor in tense silence. Reginald Carstairs sat in the formal parlor like he owned it, his boots propped on an expensive ottoman, a glass of Nathaniel's best brandy in his hand. He was perhaps 40 years old, with the kind of handsome face that would have been pleasant if not for the cruel set of his mouth. 2 men in expensive suits flanked him, lawyers Nathaniel guessed. "Cousin Genevieve," Reginald said, rising with exaggerated courtesy as they entered. "And the Duke. How domestic. How quaint." "Get out of my house," Genevieve said, her voice ice. "Your house?" Reginald laughed. "That's rich. This is the Duke's house. You're just the pretty ornament he bought to save himself from bankruptcy." Nathaniel stepped forward, fists clenching. "Watch your mouth, Carstairs. Or what, you'll challenge me to a duel? How very melodramatic." Reginald took a leisurely sip of brandy. "I'm not here to trade insults. I'm here on legal business." "Gentlemen," one of the lawyers stepped forward, producing a thick document. We represent the estate of the late Earl Cornelius Carstairs. We are here to contest the validity of the dowry paid to the Duke of Blackwood upon his marriage to Miss Genevieve Carstairs. It's Duchess of Blackwood, Genevieve said shortly. For now, Reginald said. You see, we have affidavits from 3 physicians stating that my uncle was mentally infirm in his final months, suffering from dementia, incapable of making sound financial decisions. Therefore, the marriage contract he negotiated was invalid, and the funds he transferred must be returned. Nathaniel felt ice water flooding his veins. That's absurd. Earl Carstairs was perfectly competent when we met. So you say, but these medical professionals disagree, and a court will believe doctors over a bankrupt duke. Reginald smiled. Of course there is an alternative solution. What alternative? Nathaniel demanded. Annul the marriage, Reginald said simply. Declare it invalid. Due to fraud, you were deceived about my cousin's mental state. She's not fit to be a duchess. Never has been. Return her to my care, and you can keep the dowry. Keep this manor. Walk away clean. Never, Genevieve said. I'm not talking to you, dear. Reginald turned his full attention to Nathaniel. I'm talking to the Duke, the man who married you purely for financial gain. Do you really think he'll choose you over his solvency, over this estate he's worked so hard to restore? Nathaniel looked at Genevieve. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes blazing with controlled fury. Return her to your care, Nathaniel repeated slowly. What does that mean exactly? There's a sanitarium in upstate New York, one of the lawyers said. Very discreet, very comfortable, for women of quality who suffer from nervous disorders. I'm not disordered, Genevieve said through clenched teeth. You hid from society for 6 years, Reginald countered. You exhibited signs of paranoia and delusion. You believed yourself to be disfigured when you clearly are not. These are symptoms of mental instability. And as your closest male relative, now that your father is dead, I have the legal right, indeed the obligation to ensure you receive proper care. Understanding crashed over Nathaniel like a wave. This was why Genevieve had married him. Not just for a title, for legal protection. A husband's rights superseded a cousin's. As long as she was married, Reginald couldn't touch her. But if the marriage was annulled, how much? Nathaniel asked quietly. Everyone turned to stare at him. Excuse me, Reginald said. The dowry. How much are you actually trying to take? $200,000 plus the $50,000 in restoration funds. And if I refuse to annul the marriage, if I fight this in court, the lead lawyer spoke up, then we will tie you up in litigation for years. Legal fees alone will bankrupt you, and we have enough judges in our pocket to ensure the case drags on indefinitely. You'll lose everything trying to fight us. Reginald leaned back, smiling. It's simple mathematics, Your Grace. You can keep the money and lose the girl, or you can keep the girl and lose everything. Your choice. The room fell silent. Nathaniel could feel Genevieve's eyes on him, could feel the weight of her fear, her hope, her desperate need for him to choose correctly. He thought of the past 6 weeks, of learning to manage the estate, of building the bridge, of Genevieve's patience and intelligence, and fierce determination to make something good from the ruins of both their lives. He thought of his mother's dying words. Take care of them. They're our responsibility. The tenant families were taken care of now. The cottages repaired. The bridge nearly built. He had kept his promise. But there was another promise implied in his marriage vows. To protect his wife. To stand by her side. Nathaniel met Reginald's eyes. You're right, he said quietly. This is simple mathematics, but you've miscalculated. He crossed to Genevieve and placed his hand on her shoulder. Not possessive. Protective. You seem to think I married Genevieve for money, Nathaniel continued. That was true initially, I won't lie about that. But I've spent 6 weeks learning who she is, learning what she's capable of, and I've discovered something remarkable. What? Reginald sneered. That I married up, Nathaniel said simply. My wife is brilliant. She's competent. She's saved this estate through sheer force of will and intelligence. She's worth more than all the money in your pocket or mine. So here's my answer to your generous offer. He stepped forward, his eyes boring into Reginald's. Get out of my house. Sue me if you want. Drag me through every court in New York. I don't care. You're not taking my wife. You're a fool, Reginald hissed. I'll destroy you. Let him try, Genevieve said, her voice ringing clear. But before she could continue, Nathaniel moved. Fast, he grabbed Reginald by the lapels of his expensive coat and physically lifted him from the chair. China rattled on nearby tables. The lawyer stepped back, startled. She is not a burden, Nathaniel said, his voice low and dangerous. His face was inches from Reginald's. She is the Duchess of Blackwood, and if you ever suggest I trade her for anything again, I will personally ensure you regret it. Am I clear?" He didn't wait for an answer. He shoved Reginald backward. The man stumbled, catching himself on the edge of a table. "Now get out," Nathaniel said. "Before I forget, I'm a gentleman." Reginald straightened his coat, his face purple with rage and humiliation. But before he could speak, Genevieve's voice cut through the tension. "You forgot something, Reginald," she said, her tone deadly calm. "Something rather important." "What?" he spat. "The dowry didn't come from father's estate." Genevieve walked to stand beside Nathaniel, facing her cousin with cold triumph. "It came from mother's inheritance. Her marriage settlement with father specified that her fortune was held in trust, managed by her brother, my Uncle Thaddeus." Reginald's face went pale. "Uncle Thaddeus is very much alive," Genevieve continued, "and he's a New York State Supreme Court justice. He holds the original trust documents. And those documents make it very clear that mother's money passes to me upon father's death. Not to you, not to anyone else. To me." She pulled a small key from her pocket. "This is the key to mother's deposit box at First National Bank. Inside are all the original documents. Legal binding and completely beyond your reach." She smiled, cold and triumphant. "You have no claim to the dowry, Reginald. You never did. And now you're about to be exposed for fraud and attempted extortion." The lawyers exchanged nervous glances. "You think you've won," Reginald snarled. "You think this is over." "I think you should leave," Nathaniel said. His voice was calm again, but his eyes were steel. "Now, before my wife changes her mind about pursuing legal action against you." Reginald looked from Nathaniel to Genevieve and back again. He seemed to recognize finally that he had walked into a lion's den. "This isn't finished," he said, but the threat rang hollow. "Yes," Genevieve said quietly, "it is." Reginald signaled to his lawyers, and they left in a flurry of expensive coats and impotent fury. The door slammed. Silence descended. Nathaniel turned to Genevieve. She was shaking her composure, finally cracking. "You chose me," she whispered. "Of course I chose you. But the money, the estate, everything you've worked over—" "Damn the money," Nathaniel interrupted. He took both her hands in his. "I've lost money before. I'll probably lose it again, but I won't lose my honor. And I won't abandon someone who needs protection." Tears spilled down Genevieve's cheeks. Real tears, the kind she had never let him see before. "I thought you would choose the estate. Everyone always chooses the practical thing, the safe thing." "You saved me, Genevieve," Nathaniel said softly. "You forced me to see what I'd become. You gave me purpose again. You taught me how to be the man my mother believed I could be. How could I choose anything over that?" She collapsed against his chest, sobbing with the kind of relief that comes from carrying too heavy a burden for too long. "You're safe," he murmured into her hair. "I promise. You're safe." She cried for a long time, cried out 6 years of isolation and fear and loneliness, cried out the terror of thinking she would be locked away, cried out all the pain she had carried alone, and Nathaniel held her through all of it. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes with trembling hands. "I'm sorry," she said. "That was unseemly." "That was human," Nathaniel corrected gently. "You're allowed to be human, Genevieve." She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw past the ice to the vulnerability beneath. "Why did you really defend me?" she asked. "You could have taken the money, could have walked away free and clear." Nathaniel thought about how to answer, about all the reasons that had flashed through his mind in that moment of decision. But in the end, he settled on the simplest truth. Because somewhere in the past 6 weeks, you stopped being a transaction. You became a person I respect. He hesitated. Someone I care about deeply. Genevieve's eyes searched his face, looking for deception, for manipulation. She found only honesty. "I care about you too," she admitted. "God help me, I didn't want to. But watching you work on that bridge, watching you learn and grow and try so hard to be better, I couldn't help it." They stood in the parlor snow, falling outside the windows, the fire crackling in the hearth. And for the first time since their wedding, they were not enemies. They were not even just allies. They were something more, something that felt dangerously close to the beginning of love. "What happens now?" Genevieve asked. "Now," Nathaniel smiled. "Now we finish building that bridge, together." He offered her his hand, and this time when she took it, there was no hesitation, no calculation, just trust. 6 weeks later, on a cold February morning, Nathaniel and Genevieve stood together at Miller's Creek. The bridge was complete. It was a simple structure, stone and mortar, a graceful arch spanning 30 feet of water. Not the grandest bridge Nathaniel had ever designed, but perhaps the most important. It's beautiful, Genevieve said. It's functional, Nathaniel corrected. But yes, I think it's beautiful too. A small crowd had gathered tenant family staff from the manor workers who had helped with construction. They were here for the unofficial dedication, the moment when the bridge would officially open for use. Percy had arrived from New York the night before. He stood at the edge of the crowd, grinning like a fool. "You did it, Nate," he called out. "You actually did it." "We did it," Nathaniel corrected, looking at Genevieve. She smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "Shall we?" she asked, gesturing to the bridge. They walked across together, hand in hand. The stone was solid beneath their feet. The engineering was sound. The bridge would stand for 100 years. As they reached the far side, the crowd applauded. Not polite society applause, but genuine, enthusiastic cheering. Nathaniel turned to Genevieve. "I have something for you." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I know I already gave you a wedding ring," he said, "but that was part of the transaction. This is different." He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring of twisted gold set with a small moonstone. "It's not the most expensive gem," Nathaniel explained, suddenly nervous. "But moonstones are said to protect travelers at night, and they represent new beginnings. I hoped." Genevieve looked at the ring. Then she looked at the man who had once dreaded the sight of her, the man who had expected a monster and found a partner. "It's perfect," she whispered. He slid the ring onto her finger beside her wedding band. It fit perfectly. "I'm sorry about the veil," Nathaniel said quietly, "for making you feel you had to hide." Genevieve reached up and cupped his face. "The veil is gone, Nathaniel. You lifted it." "No," he shook his head, leaning his forehead against hers. "You did. You lifted mine. I was the one hiding. Hiding from responsibility, from love, from myself. You saw me when I was invisible." He kissed her. Not the tentative kiss of strangers, not the desperate kiss of the drowning. This was a kiss of deep, abiding partnership. A kiss between equals. The crowd cheered louder. When they broke apart, Genevieve was smiling through tears. "I love you," she said. Simply, honestly. "I love you too," Nathaniel replied. "God help me, I think I started loving you the moment you called yourself a gargoyle and declared war on me." She laughed, actually laughed. "I was rather dramatic, wasn't I?" "You were magnificent. You still are." They walked back across the bridge together toward the crowd, toward the life they were building together. Behind them, the stone arch stood solid and strong, a testament to what could be built when two people stopped fighting and started working together. The Duke and his Duchess, the engineer and the strategist, the gargoyle and the man who learned to see. They had started with a lie bound by a contract of gold and greed, but in the fires of pride and pain and eventual partnership, they had forged something far more valuable. They had become real. And as the February sun broke through the clouds, casting light on the new bridge and the new life they were building, Nathaniel Blackwood realized something his mother had always known. The greatest fortune was never money or title or status. It was finding someone who saw you clearly, all your failures and all your potential, and chose to stand beside you anyway. That was the only wealth that mattered. And he was beyond measure the richest man alive.